Welcome to the Ethics of Laudato Si. This is an adult education series of UUSD, the Unitarian Universalists of Southern Delaware, a welcoming spiritual home for people of free faith, and we have found a safe and stimulating arena for sharing insights on challenging and significant topics. Welcome. In this series, we will examine and discuss the ethical principles at work in Pope Francis' letter Laudato Si, a letter addressed, as Pope Francis says, to every person living on the planet, about the crisis confronting our common home, the Earth. In this first week, we will take a quick look at what ethics is for and how ethics can work for people confronting a crisis. And then we'll examine Pope Francis' evaluation of what is going on in our common home at this time, setting the stage for what we can do about it. This is the first of 4 weeks of discussion in our series. So this week we'll examine and discuss what's going on in our common home, corresponding with Chapter 1 of Laudato Si. Next week we'll follow Francis in discerning what's really at issue in the challenges facing our Earth, corresponding with Chapter 3 of Laudato Si. Notice we'll be passing over Chapter 2, not because it's irrelevant to the issue, but because it's addressing the issue from a theological rather than an ethical point of view. In our third week, after having identified what's most basically at issue in the crisis, we will consider Francis' proposal for a targeted, focused response to that core issue corresponding to Chapter 4 of Laudato Si. Our final week we'll consider the implications, that is, working out the details, of an adequate response to our Earth's crisis in Chapter 5 of Laudato Si, and we'll reflect on how we, as persons living on this planet, will have to be changed inwardly and in our relationships through this ethical and moral struggle. Chapter 6 of Laudato Si. So here's our agenda for this week's consideration and discussion. First, we'll look quickly at what ethics is for and how it can work when facing a crisis. Then we'll examine the first chapter of Laudato Si, what is happening to our common home, paying particular attention to the ethical principles and values that are at work, implicitly or explicitly, in the chapter. Start then with what ethics is for. Ethics works to justify a decision or a course of action so that when someone asks, "Why are you doing that?" rather than something else, you're able to justify that choice with good reasons. As candidates for good reasons, ethics can supply values like life and health, principles like justice and truth, and intended consequences, good results sought, bad results avoided. Ethics can work to resolve conflicts by encouraging parties to a conflict to step back from their opposed positions, to examine why they hold those positions, and then to evaluate the foundations of their positions dispassionately in the light of differing ethical theories and principles with the attendant strengths and weaknesses of those theories and principles. Ethics can work this way. Would that more people made use of it. Ethics can also help to convince someone that you really don't want to do that there, to convince them to change a course of action by convincing arguments based in those good reasons and those sound theories and principles. Now, how does ethics work when people are called on to act in response to a challenge in their environment? Note that we're talking about people here, plural, for individuals can act from habit or instinct, but cooperation requires communication, and that is likely to involve ethics, at least if it's to be fruitful and effective. So, what's a typical pattern of response to a challenge in our environment? Typically, challenging situations are complex. So the first ethical task is to identify what is going on here. Then take a step deeper to sort past the confusion at what is really at stake here to get at the core issue. This step is a process of discernment that will likely employ ethical categories and principles. If it is successful, it will identify an implicit paradigm, an unconscious set of assumptions, or perhaps a conscious set of beliefs that is at the root of the challenging problem. An adequate and appropriate response to a challenging situation starts with addressing that core issue, contraposing a more appropriate and fruitful paradigm, and so reframing the situation. Then, based on that more fruitful paradigm, address the particular elements of the challenge. Evaluation is the final phase of the ethical process. What has changed, or what has to change, in order to resolve the challenge? And how have we who have sought to cooperate to meet the challenge, how have we changed, or how must we change? So, that's how ethics can work when people are confronting a challenge in their environment. Laudato Si follows that basic pattern, asking what is going on here, discerning what is really at stake, the core issue at the heart of the challenge, addressing that core issue with a corrective paradigm, working out the particulars, and then reflecting on what has changed, what must change in basic attitudes and values. The what is going on here question is raised in Chapter 1, What is Happening in Our Common Home? And that is the focus of our first week's reflections. Note that in that examination, important ethical principles and values will emerge. The what is at stake here question, discerning that core issue, is addressed in Chapter 3, The Human Roots of the Ecological Crisis, our second week's agenda. Addressing that core issue, counterposing a paradigm or set of values that can correct the destructive paradigm, is the work of Chapter 4, Integral Ecology, and that is the task of our third week. Working out the particulars is the work of Chapter 5, Lines of Approach and Action. and that is the first item in our 4th week's agenda. Reflecting on what needs to change in basic attitudes and values is done in Chapter 6, Ecological Education and Spirituality. The second item on our 4th week's agenda and the conclusion of our discussions together. So, that is the content of our 4 weeks together. For the method of our shared study, I suggest this pattern. Our weeks run Wednesdays through Tuesdays, which means the bulk of our activity can be on weekends. So, view an introductory video or introductory information and read the assigned reading in Laudato Si by Saturday. Respond to the questions provided in the lesson by Saturday night. Then Sunday night, look at others' responses to the same questions and comment on them. That's where we have our dialogue. By Monday night, take a look at how others have responded to your responses and respond to their responses, respond to their comments. By Tuesday night, check in for a summation. Ready? Well then, please move on to the lesson page. Download Pope Francis' letter if you've not done so already. And note the guide questions. They'll help you focus your reading. Thank you.